The Billion-Dollar Mirage, Why Even Owning? 2012. Bitcoin wouldn't make you the richest you imagine. Welcome, fellow dreamers and historical explorers, to another deep dive on boring history to sleep. Tonight, we're not just unearthing forgotten emperors or dusty societal norms. No, tonight we embark on a journey that feels both impossibly recent and strangely ancient. A narrative tinged with the intoxicating perfume of what-ifs, the bitter tang of regret, and the omnipresent, dazzling allure of unimaginable wealth. We are talking about Bitcoin. Not the polished, institutionalized Bitcoin of today, a financial behemoth quoted on major exchanges and whispered about in corporate boardrooms, but the primordial, almost mythical Bitcoin of 2012. Picture it with me for a moment. Truly try to conjure the scene in your mind's eye. A nascent, almost fringe digital curiosity, dismissed by every reputable financial institution, trading for literal pocket change. Often, a single coin was worth less than $5, frequently hovering around $1, and for stretches in its earliest days that year, sometimes even below 50 cents. It was a digital ghost, a whisper in obscure online forums, a quirky obsession for a few tech-savvy outsiders, seemingly inconsequential, yet pregnant with unforeseen potential. The thought must have crossed millions of minds as Bitcoin later rocketed into the stratosphere. What if I had bought just a little? What if I had been brave enough to truly invest everything I could spare? The narrative we are relentlessly fed by media and hindsight evangelists is a glittering, simplistic fable. One of instant, boundless riches, reserved for those impossibly prescient few who recognized its genius. But what if I told you that the reality, for nearly every single human being on this planet, would have been vastly, vastly different? What if that golden ticket you missed was actually laced with unexpected pitfalls, booby traps of psychological warfare, and practical impossibilities so formidable that they would have left you far, far from the lavish, worry-free billionaire lifestyle you constantly fantasize about? Tonight, my friends, we are peeling back layer after layer of this mesmerizing financial fantasy, dissecting it with the cold, hard logic of reality to uncover precisely why, even if you had miraculously bought Bitcoin back in 2012, you almost certainly wouldn't be as rich as you think. This isn't just about price charts. It's about the relentless march of time, the fickle nature of human psychology, and the brutal grind of everyday existence. Before we embark on this truly in-depth, perhaps even cerebrally numbing exploration, I'm genuinely curious and eager to connect. Where in this vast spinning globe are you drifting off with us tonight? And what precise second is ticking by in your corner of the world right now? Drop a comment below. It brings me an unexpected comfort knowing we're all tethered, however briefly, by this shared moment of quiet, intellectual contemplation. The siren song of What If is, without a doubt, one of the most powerful and psychologically seductive forces known to the human mind. It weaves intricate tapestries of alternate realities, tantalizing us with images of fortunes amassed and lives lived free from want or worry. This force is amplified tenfold when applied to Bitcoin's historical price trajectory. Picture that pivotal moment once more. It's 2012. Bitcoin, this quirky digital currency, a conceptual child born of cryptic white papers and shadowy online communities, is exchanging hands for what most rational people considered laughably insignificant sums. Sometimes just a few dollars, sometimes less than one, occasionally even pennies for a single unit. The sensational headlines of today constantly blare the narratives of early adopters, the legends of those who transformed a mere few $100s into staggering sums of millions, or even the almost unimaginable echelons of billions. Our minds effortlessly, almost automatically, leap to the most thrilling conclusion. If only I had possessed the insight, the courage, the sheer audacity to buy then, I would now be lounging on a pristine beach in the Maldives, served by white-gloved attendants, arriving everywhere in a bespoke private jet, or perhaps finally realizing that lifelong dream of funding my most whimsical passion project without so much as a fleeting glance at the associated cost. This particular fantasy is so utterly vivid, so irresistibly alluring, because it directly preys upon and masterfully amplifies our most fundamental and deeply ingrained human desires: the craving for financial freedom, for an emancipation from the daily grind of earning and spending, and for the powerful, intoxicating validation that accompanies truly monumental financial success. We ravenously consume the distilled, heroic sagas of those mythical figures who supposedly got rich with Bitcoin, yet we conveniently and consistently, perhaps even willfully, forget the innumerable legions who bravely attempted, spectacularly failed, or simply could not, under any conceivable circumstances, endure the decade-long ordeal required to truly hold on. This dangerously simplified narrative, so often manufactured and endlessly propagated by sensationalist media reports and relentlessly cherry-picked examples, painstakingly cultivates an idealized, almost utopian vision of early Bitcoin wealth. A vision that is, to put it mildly, profoundly incomplete. It deliberately, or perhaps ignorantly, ignores the brutal, unforgiving reality of what it truly meant to navigate the treacherous, utterly uncharted, and overwhelmingly hostile waters of nascent cryptocurrency. It paints a deceptively smooth picture of an inevitable, predestined ascent, when in fact the actual journey was an agonizing tightrope walk over a bottomless chasm of potential financial ruin, a path relentlessly strewn with terrifying, sudden plunges, an overwhelming chorus of derisive skepticism from every corner, and an almost complete absence of any meaningful financial infrastructure or even basic understanding from the wider world. The very act of merely acquiring Bitcoin back then wasn't akin to today's seamless digital transactions. A few clicks on a sleek, intuitively designed exchange app. It was an adventurous foray into the wild, untamed digital wilderness, a process that frequently demanded significant technical acumen, an almost naive willingness to engage with fledgling and often profoundly precarious online platforms, and a hefty, audacious dose of almost childlike optimism commingled with daring, even reckless conviction. Furthermore, the very concept of being rich is itself a notoriously nebulous, highly subjective, and perpetually shifting target. For some, it might signify nothing more than the sweet serenity of complete financial independence, a quiet assurance of solvency. For others, however, it invariably implies the dizzying, truly stratospheric wealth that positions one alongside legendary tech moguls and oil barons. The imagined fortune derived from a perfectly timed 2012 Bitcoin purchase almost invariably aligns with the latter, sketching a portrait of limitless abundance and absolute impunity. Yet, the winding pathway from a humble, insignificant 2012 investment to that kind of unfathomable wealth was not just extraordinarily long and excruciatingly arduous. It was a grueling gauntlet, a constant navigation through a minefield of psychological traps and practical impossibilities, each exquisitely designed to make you stumble, to falter, to utterly lose your grip on your conviction, and ultimately to divest yourself from what appeared to be an increasingly futile gamble. It is paramount that we dispassionately separate the tantalizing fiction from the far more sobering, humbling, and utterly inconvenient facts, to fundamentally grasp that even the best, most honorable intentions and the earliest, most astute entries into this embryonic market very often culminated in scenarios dramatically divergent from the lavish, sun-drenched yacht fantasies that so vigorously fuel our waking dreams. It was, frankly, an anomaly to truly succeed, not a guaranteed, predetermined outcome. It was a profoundly chaotic, brutally unforgiving landscape, where only a minuscule, uniquely gifted fraction of humanity truly possessed the preternatural combination of rare technical prowess, almost pathological psychological resilience, a truly cosmic degree of luck, and a providential freedom from immediate, pressing financial needs, not merely to buy the coins, but to actually hold them steadfastly through the ensuing digital dark ages, to somehow emerge triumphantly on the other side, and crucially to then actually translate that abstract theoretical wealth into real-world, tangible purchasing power without succumbing to any of the myriad temptations or tribulations. Even if you, against all prevailing logic and common sense, managed to persuade your deepest self to allocate precious resources to this peculiar digital experiment in 2012, the monumental act of actually acquiring Bitcoin was an unforeseen and Herculean challenge, an almost impenetrable barrier to entry that effectively pruned untold numbers of potential future millionaires from the burgeoning tree before their aspirational leaves could even begin to unfurl. Completely erase from your modern mind the sleek, intuitively designed, lightning-fast user interfaces, the meticulously vetted platforms backed by major financial institutions, and the effortless, near-instantaneous fiat on-ramps we consider standard today. In 2012, the financial landscape where Bitcoin existed was a primitive, undeveloped, and perilously uncertain terrain. It was sparsely populated with hastily assembled, often glitchy online forums, fledgling exchanges with questionably competent technical teams, and an unsettling, pervasive requirement for a level of unverified trust that, more often than not, was catastrophically misplaced. You couldn't simply connect your meticulously linked bank account, or fluidly swipe your widely accepted credit card to purchase this strange new asset. The prevalent methods for converting your hard-earned traditional fiat currency into Bitcoin were cumbersome beyond belief, painstakingly slow, frequently riddled with friction, and inherently, frighteningly fraught with risk. More often than not, you'd find yourself deep within the shadowy recesses of peer-to-peer trades, meticulously arranged on obscure online bulletin boards like the legendary Bitcoin Talk forum, where you were literally wiring a substantial sum of your money, often thousands of dollars, to an individual whose real name, location, and true intentions remained utterly anonymous. Your transaction was built entirely on a foundation of desperate hope that they would, in a truly commendable act of digital integrity, actually reciprocate by sending you the promised coins. The now universally recognized regulatory concepts of Know Your Customer, KYC, or robust anti-money laundering, AML, mandates were either conspicuously absent, rudimentary to the point of ineffectiveness, or simply non-existent at best. This gaping regulatory void meant, critically, a complete and total lack of recourse, absolutely no avenue for restitution, should you fall victim to a scam, a distressingly common, heartbreakingly prevalent occurrence in those Wild West days of nascent crypto. Furthermore, the few primitive exchanges that dared to exist, such as the now infamous McGox, were clunky, unreliable digital beasts plagued by maddeningly frequent downtime, possessing perilously thin liquidity for anything beyond microtransactions, and functioning as magnetic honeypots for cunning, relentless hackers. Imagine the sheer, teeth-grinding frustration of attempting to purchase a genuinely significant quantity of Bitcoin, let's say several $1,000s worth, which in those heady days could have easily netted you hundreds or even thousands of individual coins. The spread, or the significant difference between the bid and ask prices, could be gargantuan, effectively draining your capital before you even fully acquired your position. The digital order books, rather than being robust and vibrant, were perilously thin, often displaying only a few dozen outstanding orders at any given time. Successfully completing such a transaction, without significant slippage or unexpected fees, could easily stretch from several infuriating days to many soul-crushing weeks of protracted, often infuriating back-and-forth correspondence and endless digital fiddling. Traditional banks, viewing this digital phenomenon with extreme suspicion and a palpable air of disdain, consistently complicated the lives of early crypto enthusiasts. Deposits to and withdrawals from these fledgling crypto operations were notoriously difficult to execute, frequently resulting in arbitrary frozen accounts, aggressive questioning by bewildered branch managers, or even outright emphatic rejections of any transaction that remotely alluded to virtual currencies. This wasn't a sleek, user-friendly, gratification-on-demand world. It was an exhaustive, mentally taxing trial by fire, a stringent test of one's patience, fundamental technical competence, and an iron stomach for extraordinary levels of financial risk. Qualities that the vast majority of mainstream investors, or even merely curious individuals, simply did not possess. The mental friction, the profound investment of time and relentless effort required to even perform the most rudimentary steps, such as setting up a secure wallet, grappling with the abstract concepts of private and public keys, and ensuring secure digital storage, was, in itself, a profoundly daunting undertaking. Without the benefit of established user-friendly tutorials, readily available guides, or robust, empathetic customer support, users were largely abandoned to their own devices, frequently fumbling their way through cryptic command line interfaces, or nervously experimenting with early, often buggy and error-prone, software versions. The sheer technical overhead, the labyrinthine procedures, and the opaque jargon alone proved sufficient to scare off all but the most truly dedicated, the unequivocally tech-savvy, and perhaps the slightly eccentric individual who possessed a peculiar appetite for digital exploration. This demanding gauntlet ruthlessly filtered out legions of would-be investors, significantly reducing the pool of potential early adopters who could legitimately claim to have established a substantial, truly meaningful position. the insurmountable technical barrier effectively relegated Bitcoin to a curious niche obsession, far from its destined role as a burgeoning, legitimate asset class. This unforgiving entry process fundamentally ensured that the mythical average person merely acquiring a significant amount of Bitcoin in 2012 was not only extraordinarily unlikely, but for most, practically an insurmountable impossibility given the bewildering array of self-imposed and externally enforced obstacles that relentlessly stood squarely in their way. It was less about financial acumen and more about raw, unyielding digital persistence. Navigating the tempestuous financial seas after your initial 2012 Bitcoin purchase, however minor, was emphatically not a leisurely, sun-drenched cruise. Rather, it was a brutal, protracted odyssey through a perpetual storm, especially during the soul-crushing, punishingly long, and profoundly demoralizing bear markets that inevitably followed Bitcoin's early, exhilarating pumps. Even if, by some truly miraculous convergence of sheer determination, luck, and unwavering foresight, you had managed to acquire a substantial digital bag of Bitcoin during its infancy, clinging to it steadfastly through the incessant, chaotic, and relentlessly capricious market cycles that defined its nascent years was an excruciating test of willpower. A test so extreme that precious few could ever genuinely endure it. In those early wild days, the market wasn't a mature, relatively predictable ecosystem driven by institutional players and established macroeconomic indicators. It was a frenetic, almost primordial soup, hyper-speculative to its core, insanely volatile, and often violently driven by the fleeting whims of obscure internet personalities, unsubstantiated rumors, and outright technological experimentation rather than solid, definable fundamentals. Imagine, if you can truly viscerally feel it, buying your first tranche of Bitcoin, perhaps triumphantly securing a coin or two around $5 apiece in late 2012 or early 2013, basking in the glow of feeling like an undeniable pioneer, a visionary in a world of skeptics. Then, almost immediately, witness it with your own two disbelieving eyes as it catapults to $20, then majestically breaches $50, even bursting past the unimaginable psychological barrier of $200 in a thrilling, heart-stopping surge in April 2013. The rush would have been indescribable, the sense of validation immense. But then, as abruptly as a digital cliff, watch in horrified paralysis as your burgeoning theoretical fortune plummets with brutal efficiency, shedding over 80% of its value, cascading back down to a humbling figure under $50, all within a terrifyingly compressed span of mere days. This wasn't an isolated anomalous blip. This was, chillingly, merely a prelude, a harbinger of the ensuing years of such relentless, extreme, and psychologically damaging price action. We, the hindsight historians, tend to selectively remember and hero worship only the exhilarating, intoxicating highs. But the crushing psychological toll of witnessing a significant, hard-won chunk of your nascent fortune simply evaporate into the digital ether overnight, or over a single trading week, is an insidious form of torture that is genuinely immense and enduring. Then, after the brief and thrilling pump and dump of early 2013, came the truly brutal, soul-devouring long winter. After peaking again with the stunning rally in late 2013, surging heroically around $200 per coin, Bitcoin embarked on a relentless, agonizing, almost nihilistic descent that would endure for what felt like an eternity, stretching out over many agonizing years. By early 2015, the initial hopeful bloom had withered. It had comprehensively crashed, plummeting over 80% from its historic peak, dipping ominously below $200 and stubbornly languishing there for an extended, excruciating period, often even hovering despondently below $100 for months on end. For any rational individual who had dared to invest their hard-earned savings, perhaps a substantial portion, or even money borrowed against their better judgment, seeing their once promising theoretical hundreds of thousands, or even millions, dwindle back down to mere tens of thousands, or perhaps even less than their original principal, would have been an absolutely excruciating, spirit-breaking ordeal. This wasn't merely a fleeting paper loss. This was profoundly real money, tangible capital, currency that you had poured into this audacious, seemingly foolish venture, perhaps against the stern advice and outright mockery of exasperated friends, deeply concerned family members, and every prevailing financial pundit. The ever-skeptical financial media, who had been gleefully prognosticating its demise from day one, would have ravenously pounced on this protracted downturn, eagerly publishing Bitcoin's innumerable, dramatic obituaries, fueling a pervasive, choking atmosphere of overwhelming fear, uncertainty, and doubt, known universally by its chilling acronym FUD. Your erstwhile skeptical friends, having now found their self-righteous vindication, would have openly, unapologetically mocked you with a mixture of pity and smugness. Your family, previously concerned, would have now openly expressed their profound disappointment or exasperated concern that bordered on thinly veiled criticism for your apparent folly. Every single human instinct, every rational, self-preserving impulse within your being would have screamed in your ears, "Get out! Extract yourself! Cut your losses before this digital pipe dream utterly implodes and truly goes to zero. Salvage whatever paltry remnants you can before it's too late." The esoteric concept of patiently holding onto an incredibly volatile, poorly understood asset for a seemingly eternal decade, or even merely half a decade, through such relentless, brutally protracted downturns, without any visible, guiding light at the end of the proverbial tunnel, without even an iota of mainstream validation, without even the glimmer of regulatory clarity, and often amidst an endemic landscape of rampant scams and frequent hacks, is, frankly, practically alien, utterly anathema to fundamental human psychology. The vast majority of people, myself included, would have unequivocally sold long before the subsequent glorious rebound, desperately seeking to salvage something, anything at all, from what, at the time, appeared with devastating clarity to be a comprehensively sinking digital ship. They would have capitulated and sold their once promising assets at a pathetic fraction of their peak theoretical valuation, firmly convinced, through bitter experience, that the audacious digital experiment had definitively failed. This sustained, agonizing period of immense, gut-wrenching paper loss and merciless public ridicule wasn't just a minor inconvenience or a passing storm. It was, undeniably, a psychologically engineered gauntlet designed with ruthless efficiency to systematically shatter resolve, to break the strongest spirits, leaving behind only an infinitesimally tiny fraction of those pioneering early adopters who truly possessed the elusive, almost pathological trait of diamond hands, that unyielding, almost superhuman capacity to steadfastly weather such a devastating, prolonged, and truly existential storm without breaking. It's effortless, even comfortable, to gaze back through the perfectly clarifying lens of 2020 hindsight. But the visceral, lived experience of surviving and enduring those grinding, desolate years of doubt and despair demanded a type of psychological fortitude that transcends mere typical investment strategies and borders on the truly, clinically, pathological. It separated the myth from the truly exceptional few. As if the inherent mind-bending market volatility wasn't a sufficiently potent psychological battering ram. The early days of Bitcoin were, from its very inception, inextricably and, some would argue, damningly linked with prevalent narratives of illicit activity. This dark, indelible stain, magnified and endlessly replayed by an eager moralistic media, relentlessly colored public perception, and heaped an immense, often unbearable burden of social and legal pressure upon the shoulders of anyone brave or foolish enough to actively hold the fledgling digital asset. We are, of course, talking about the notorious rise and cataclysmic fall of the Silk Road. In the pivotal years of 2012 and 2013, for the overwhelming majority of people existent beyond the confines of deeply insular tech communities, academic cryptography circles, and libertarian online forums, Bitcoin wasn't just an obscure, perplexing digital oddity. It was primarily, if not exclusively, known as the shadowy, preferred currency of the dark web. It was universally framed, often with salacious undertones, as the medium of exchange for illicit goods and clandestine services flourishing on anonymous online marketplaces, with the Silk Road serving as its poster child for digital vice. The mainstream media, sensing a tantalizing cocktail of nascent technology, illegal activities, and moral panic, ravenously pounced on this captivating narrative, gleefully demonizing Bitcoin and deliberately portraying it as an intrinsically evil tool, primarily for unrepentant criminals, sophisticated money launderers, insidious drug traffickers, and illicit arms dealers. Sensationalist, fear-mongering headlines, often featuring lurid imagery and alarming statistics, blared across countless newspapers, dominated cable news segments, and echoed relentlessly through online portals, meticulously detailing every bust, every federal indictment, and consistently, inextricably associating the strange, new digital currency with a burgeoning ecosystem of clandestine, profoundly illegal operations. For anyone who held even a single Bitcoin during this period, this relentlessly negative, almost propagandistic media onslaught created an intensely uncomfortable, profoundly disquieting, and often outright terrifying existential situation. You weren't simply an early adopter, an adventurous investor venturing into unknown technological territory. You were, in the suspicious eyes of an anxious public, potentially federal agents, bewildered banking officials, and genuinely concerned family members, either directly a criminal yourself, or, at the very least, implicitly, undeniably complicit in facilitating nefarious criminal activities. This pervasive, overwhelmingly negative public perception wasn't some abstract, ephemeral philosophical problem. It led directly to very real, tangible, and often deeply alarming consequences. Banks, already deeply wary of anything non-traditional, became exponentially more hesitant and overtly suspicious of anything remotely crypto-related. They significantly increased their vigilance, frequently closing down long-standing personal and business accounts, aggressively interrogating account holders, or unilaterally blocking transaction after transaction with even a hint of virtual currency. This mounting otherness extended to law enforcement agencies, which began taking an uncomfortably keen and growing interest in anything connected to Bitcoin, sparking widespread fears of imminent, draconian regulatory crackdowns, arbitrary asset seizures, or even, most terrifyingly, personal legal ramifications for merely possessing what increasingly appeared to be a shady, illicit, or criminal asset. The uncertainty emanating from these converging forces was paralyzing, psychologically debilitating. Could your carefully acquired digital coins somehow be deemed tainted? Could your innocuous Bitcoin wallet address suddenly be flagged as suspicious by government agencies, triggering an audit or investigation? These were not merely idle, paranoid musings born of an overactive imagination. They were frighteningly genuine possibilities, very real threats that loomed large, a suffocating sword of Damocles suspended over your theoretical fortune. The sheer, overwhelming pressure to divest, to rapidly sell off your holdings, to vehemently dissociate yourself from this toxic, growing infamy was immense, an almost irresistible siren call for self-preservation. Imagine the agonizing struggle of attempting to rationalize your curious investment choice to a cadre of deeply worried, disapproving family members, or a stern, suspicious financial advisor, when every single news report on television, in print, and online unequivocally linked Bitcoin, almost without exception, to infamous drug lords, illicit arms trafficking, and shadowy criminal enterprises. The unbearable weight of this pervasive stigma, this digital scarlet letter, undoubtedly became too heavy, too psychologically corrosive, for untold numbers of early adopters to bear. The burning desire to simply cash out, to escape, even if it meant realizing only a modest profit, or tragically, even an outright loss, purely to sever all ties with the rapidly proliferating narrative of infamy, morphed into an overwhelmingly powerful, self-preservational motivator. The esoteric notion of holding a purely speculative asset when it also concurrently carried such profound and ever-escalating social and legal baggage was simply unpalatable, psychologically toxic, and utterly unsustainable for the vast majority of everyday individuals. This made sustained, long-term conviction an incredibly rare, deeply arduous, and almost superhuman path to successfully tread. The significant reputational risk, compounded exponentially by growing, increasingly vocal calls for outright governmental prohibition from powerful figures, forged a constant, insidious, gnawing anxiety that slowly but surely chipped away at the fragile resolve and wavering conviction of countless early Bitcoin holders. And then, as if fate itself conspired to thin the ranks of the already dwindling pool of resolute Bitcoin believers, came an event of such seismic, catastrophic proportions that, for an innumerable legion of individuals, it became the undisputed final nail in the coffin for their nascent Bitcoin aspirations, the spectacular, ignominious implosion and subsequent complete annihilation of Mt. Gox. If you were one of the exceptionally brave, perhaps blissfully naive, or simply profoundly audacious souls who had ventured into the precarious world of Bitcoin investment by 2013, the cold, hard, unshakable truth is that your diligently acquired funds, or at the very least, a critically significant portion of them, were, in all probability, perilously residing on this particular exchange. Mt. Gox was, for a relatively fleeting yet undeniably impactful period, the utterly dominant behemoth Bitcoin exchange on the global stage, processing and meticulously handling an astonishing, almost unbelievable 70% of all global Bitcoin transactions at its peak, an unfathomable concentration of market power. It wasn't just an exchange, it was the quintessential, indispensable central hub, the perceived nexus for acquiring, exchanging, and liquidating Bitcoin worldwide. So, when this gargantuan exchange, after what had been months of increasingly troubling withdrawal issues, a maddening litany of cryptic error messages, opaque public statements, and frustrating delays, suddenly and without immediate explanation halted all trading activity, dramatically shuttered its digital doors, and ultimately, inevitably, declared itself officially bankrupt in the chillingly bleak early months of 2014, it unleashed shockwaves of unimaginable magnitude. These reverberations tore through the already fragile, deeply distrusting, nascent cryptocurrency community with such ferocity that their lingering tremors are, undeniably, still palpably felt and remembered today by anyone who lived through that dark period. The sheer, horrifying scale of the losses was truly staggering, almost beyond comprehension. An estimated minimum of 850,000 bitcoins, an almost mythical hoard then valued at approximately $450 million, a figure that barely scratches the surface of the human cost, were declared unequivocally lost or systematically stolen, evaporating into the cold, indifferent digital ether. Just try to grasp that number. 850,000 bitcoins. To frame that in today's breathtaking valuations, that figure would be many tens, possibly hundreds, of billions of dollars. Imagine the crushing despair, the profound, gut-wrenching betrayal. You had invested cautiously, perhaps even audaciously, in 2012, weathering all the preceding storms, only to witness your initial, relatively modest investment heroically balloon to a truly significant sum, possibly even life-changing by late 2013 during Bitcoin's epic run. And then, in a devastatingly cruel twist of digital fate, to have that entire hard-won, carefully cultivated theoretical fortune brutally, comprehensively wiped out, instantly rendered non-existent in a horrifying, irreversible flash. For hundreds of thousands of pioneering, hopeful, yet ultimately betrayed early investors spanning every continent, their entire life's Bitcoin holdings, their diligently nurtured, deeply cherished theoretical fortunes, simply and irrevocably vanished overnight. Not due to a typical market correction or a momentary downturn that could be patiently weathered, but because the very platform, the singular digital vault, they had unequivocally entrusted with their invaluable digital assets proved to be fundamentally, spectacularly, and tragically unreliable. This wasn't merely a question of poor investment timing or market misjudgment. It was a brutal, scarring, unforgiving lesson in the profound perils of custodial risk, the terrifying fragility of misplaced trust, and the profound existential immaturity of the early, utterly untested crypto infrastructure. The raw, enduring trauma of the Mt. Gox implosion triggered widespread disillusionment that ran deep and, critically, fostered a profound, almost irretrievable, loss of fundamental trust in the entire nascent ecosystem of cryptocurrency. Untold multitudes of people, after having their life savings, or critically significant portions of it, systematically stolen, irredeemably locked away, or simply vanishing without a trace, justly swore off engaging with cryptocurrency forever, forever scarred by the experience. Who, in their right mind, could genuinely blame them for this profound disavowal? The adage of "not your keys, not your coins," which would eventually become the sacred mantra and ultimate battle cry for self-custody advocates, only truly gained its profound resonance and wide recognition after the traumatic Gox failure. But for those who weren't sufficiently technically savvy, or who simply possessed neither the technical knowledge nor the terrifying foresight to adequately self-custody their assets, or, crucially, simply didn't foresee such a monumental, cataclysmic, unprecedented institutional failure on that scale, the Gox collapse unequivocally signified game over. It wasn't a minor setback or a temporary inconvenience. It was a genuinely epical, calamitous event, so catastrophic and deeply demoralizing that it mercilessly plunged the entire Bitcoin market into a prolonged, multi-year bear cycle, permanently convinced legions of countless potential future investors that crypto was inherently nothing more than a criminal scam or a dangerous pipe dream, and irrevocably, fundamentally altered the lives and financial trajectories of untold thousands who had dared, in their naive optimism, to dream of securing early, effortless wealth through this strange new digital asset. Even for that tiny, resilient fraction of individuals who, against incredible odds, somehow managed to hold on to a portion of their coins off of the treacherous Gox exchange, the sheer terror and universal impact of the event undoubtedly intensified already existing fears about the fundamental security, existential legitimacy, and inherent fragility of Bitcoin as a whole, fueling an immense, overwhelming, almost irresistible psychological pressure to simply sell what little remained and frantically disengage from the overwhelming chaos before a similar, inevitable catastrophe could claim what they had salvaged. Even if you, with extraordinary acumen or inexplicable luck, somehow managed to deftly sidestep the catastrophic, faith-shattering failure of Mt. Gox, the sheer, crushing burden of custodial risk itself represented a stealthy, relentless gauntlet, a silent, psychological crucible that, without a doubt, would have severely thinned the ranks of resolute early Bitcoin holders, stripping away untold numbers of theoretical future fortunes. In the primordial crypto era of 2012, and extending perilously through even 2015, the landscape of options for truly secure, self-custodied storage of your invaluable digital assets was, to put it mildly, laughably underdeveloped and dangerously immature. There existed no sleek, user-friendly, meticulously designed hardware wallets from revered manufacturers like Ledger or Trezor, at least not in any widely accessible, mass-market form that was readily understood or easily procurable by the average consumer. Your fundamental choices for safeguarding your burgeoning, highly volatile, yet immensely valuable digital fortune were frighteningly limited, often boiling down to dangerously insecure software wallets running on your frequently virus-prone home computer, incredibly inconvenient and potentially fragile paper wallets, or, in an act of almost desperate hope, the ill-fated gamble that a third-party online exchange wouldn't abruptly vanish, succumb to a massive hack, or simply abscond with your meticulously acquired funds. Each of these options presented its own labyrinthine maze of confounding technical hurdles, complex configurations, and manifold potential points of catastrophic failure that, for the statistically average person, without specialized training or deep technical expertise would have proven utterly insurmountable, a recipe for inevitable loss over an extended period. Imagine, truly envision, the gnawing, constant, corrosive stress. You are now the reluctant custodian of a new, purely digital asset that, while admittedly prone to wild, terrifying fluctuations, possesses the staggering, mind-boggling potential for truly enormous, life-altering gains. Suddenly, without warning, the profound, weighty burden of essentially becoming your own personal bank, the sole, ultimate guarantor of your financial destiny, descends entirely upon your shoulders, leaving you feeling terrifyingly isolated and responsible. A rudimentary software wallet haphazardly installed on your average desktop computer, while initially appearing deceptively convenient and accessible, was, in stark reality, a veritable paradise for sophisticated hackers and cunning cybercriminals. One solitary, careless click on an expertly crafted phishing email, one unwitting download of malicious, stealthy software, or one neglected, unpatched operating system vulnerability was all it took for your meticulously guarded private keys, the single, irreplaceable access point to your entire theoretical fortune, to be irrevocably compromised, seized, and spirited away forever. We, in our modern, cybersecurity-aware era, often forget the pervasive, widespread era of devastating computer viruses, insidious Trojans, and relentless malware attacks that ran rampant then, predating the widespread adoption of sophisticated, intuitive antivirus solutions and robust, automatically updating operating system safeguards that have since become standard. Back then, individuals routinely lost critical data, suffered catastrophic hard drive failures, or endured the utter corruption of their entire operating systems due to various digital plagues. Now, desperately imagine that crucial, irreplaceable data being the sole, unbacked-up key to your literally millions or tens of millions of dollars in hard-won Bitcoin. If, by some stroke of advanced technical knowledge or extreme paranoia, you opted for the technically safer, yet incredibly impractical option of a traditional paper wallet, which involved meticulously printing out your critically important public and private keys onto a single vulnerable piece of paper, you were then immediately confronted with a daunting, equally formidable set of analog challenges concerning physical security. How, exactly, do you propose to safely and securely store such an inherently fragile, yet immensely valuable physical document for an entire decade or more? Do you trust a home safe? Do you meticulously bury it in some secret, anonymous location in your backyard, hoping your memory doesn't fade with age? What unfathomable consequence would occur if it were tragically damaged by an unforeseen flood, incinerated in a house fire, or simply irrevocably misplaced, lost amidst the chaotic flotsam and jetsam of life over a relentless decade? What if the printer ink gradually fades into illegibility over time? This seemingly simplistic solution of a paper wallet introduces a whole host of formidable physical security challenges that, for most people, prove just as intractable, just as dangerous as the purely digital ones. Undeniably, many individuals, with the best of intentions, would have tragically misplaced, irretrievably lost, or inadvertently destroyed their utterly critical private keys or irreplaceable seed phrases over the course of these long, demanding years. We are talking about minute, delicate bits of digital information that are infinitely more critical, more irreplaceable, than any bank account password or online login credential. Yet people, with frightening regularity, routinely forget passwords for even the most trivial online services. Expecting an ordinary human being to meticulously and perfectly safeguard a string of 12 or 24 random words, their seed phrase, for an entire decade, maintaining an acute understanding of its profound, absolute significance, and never once making an irreversible mistake or forgetting its location, is asking for an almost superhuman, entirely unrealistic level of organizational discipline, unparalleled foresight, and unwavering mental vigilance that most ordinary people, myself included, simply do not possess. This gargantuan task isn't just about raw technical skill or digital acumen. It's about the overwhelming, crushing psychological burden of being the sole, ultimate guarantor of your own monumental wealth. The pervasive, relentless fear of making one single, irreversible mistake that could lead to instantaneous financial ruin, and the complete, terrifying absence of any safety net, any human customer support, or any accessible recovery mechanism to fall back on if, or more accurately, when, something inevitably went wrong. These compounding, multifaceted pressures alone would have proven more than sufficient to persuade countless early holders to frantically transfer their diligently acquired coins back onto an online exchange at the very first opportunity for perceived safety, a misguided move that would inevitably lead them, often ironically, directly into the clutches of the next major hacking event or calamitous exchange collapse. The now hallowed adage, "your keys, not your coins," while undeniably a foundational piece of wisdom, represented an immense and constant psychological and technical challenge that, in hindsight, undoubtedly drastically reduced the number of genuinely rich, truly successful early Bitcoin investors, filtering out all but the most meticulously cautious and technically proficient. The most insidious, quietly effective robber of early Bitcoin wealth, an unseen adversary often far more powerful and pervasive than the cunningest hackers or the most spectacularly failing exchanges, was often an enemy closer to home, far more prosaic yet undeniably effective. The relentless, grinding demands of the individual's own daily life and its inevitable, unending series of financial needs. We, with the detached luxury of retrospective imagination, can effortlessly construct an idyllic fantasy where a hypothetical, you bought 1,000 bitcoins for a mere few dollars each in 2012 and simply, effortlessly, held them with steely resolve for an entire decade, completely unburdened by the relentless drumbeat of impending bill payments, the sudden, urgent crises of unexpected financial emergencies, or the ordinary, ceaseless desires that fuel human consumption. But the harsh, inconvenient truth of reality, as it so often does, rarely aligns with such perfectly convenient, neatly packaged narratives. Very, very few individuals in 2012, and this point is absolutely critical to understanding the profound statistical improbability of retaining massive wealth, particularly those inclined to gamble on a fringe digital currency like Bitcoin, possessed the kind of lavish surplus income, the readily available liquid capital, or the pre-existing robust wealth that would enable them to confidently invest in something so wildly speculative and then, crucially, to simply placidly forget about it for an entire decade. More often than not, for those pioneering adventurous souls, the initial investment was itself a calculated stretch, an audacious gamble taken on a whim, or perhaps a cautiously earmarked small portion of genuinely discretionary savings that, over the ensuing tumultuous years, would paradoxically become increasingly, critically significant as Bitcoin's value began its dizzying ascent. Imagine the gut-wrenching, everyday reality. You are a perfectly ordinary person, juggling the omnipresent burden of a substantial mortgage payment that looms large every month, navigating the seemingly eternal weight of student loan repayments, bracing yourself for the inevitable, recurring car repairs, grappling with unforeseen, terrifying medical emergencies, or simply harboring the profoundly human, utterly understandable desire to finally take a much-needed family vacation or upgrade your outdated laptop for work or entertainment. As Bitcoin began its first dramatic, thrilling ascent in early 2013, perhaps rocketing almost inexplicably from a humble $10 to a truly impressive $100, then surging past an unimaginable $1,000 mark by the end of that tumultuous year. Those initial pocket change investments that seemed so trivial at the outset would, almost overnight, metamorphose into genuinely substantial, profoundly real sums of money. What had begun, perhaps, as a cautiously invested $500, a sum that might have seemed adventurous yet manageable when Bitcoin languished at $5 per coin, thereby securing you 100 precious BTC, would now be worth, with a simple glance at a volatile digital ticker, $5,000. Then, incredibly, $10,000. Then, for many, the truly astounding, life-altering figure of $100,000. For the vast, overwhelming majority of human beings on this planet, $10,000, let alone $100,000, is far from play money. It's not a mere theoretical placeholder in a speculative fantasy. It represents unequivocally a crucial down payment on a modest home, the foundational cornerstone for a child's looming college education fund, the vital capital for a desperate family medical emergency, or an utterly life-changing sum capable of altering the trajectory of one's future. The temptation, the siren's irresistible call to take profits, even what would to later prove to be laughably modest ones in the grand, sweeping scheme of Bitcoin's future potential, would become absolutely terrifyingly overwhelming. Your rational brain, programmed for self-preservation and immediate problem-solving, would likely whisper, "I'll just sell a small percentage, perhaps 10%, enough to finally cover that unexpected, urgent car repair that's been nagging at me." Or, perhaps with the self-justifying rationalization, "I'll cash out just enough for a decent, much-needed family vacation. After all, I've still got a solid 90% of my original holding left to ride the supposedly endless wave." Each and every single time you succumb to this utterly human, immensely relatable temptation, and sold a portion of your diligently acquired Bitcoin, no matter how ostensibly small, it meticulously and incrementally chipped away at your ultimate, theoretically maximized potential wealth. And truthfully, who in good conscience could genuinely blame you for these decisions? When the unforgiving due date for your monthly rent payment stares menacingly from your bank statement, or a beloved family member faces an unforeseen medical crisis that demands immediate financial assistance, or an incredible, once-in-a-lifetime life opportunity abruptly materializes, such as a chance to launch a promising new business, embark on a unique, soul-enriching travel experience, or provide a vital leg up to a loved one, turning down access to tens of thousands of dollars, or even hundreds of thousands, extracted from an admittedly volatile, profoundly poorly understood asset, would have been an act of almost inhuman, utterly incomprehensible psychological denial. Most individuals, driven by instinct, empathy, and necessity, would unequivocally prioritize immediate, tangible, and profoundly pressing needs, opting for the comfort and relief of instant gratification over the hazy, uncertain, incredibly distant promise of potentially astronomical, abstract wealth. These seemingly insignificant, seemingly harmless small withdrawals for the prosaic exigencies of daily life, accumulated inexorably over a period of many years, would have translated into an absolutely monumental drain on one's potential, optimized portfolio. The vibrant mental image you hold of eventually selling just enough Bitcoin to afford a gleaming Lamborghini today might, in the cold light of historical reality, actually have manifested as selling disparate, painful bits and pieces of your holdings over countless years, just to settle your actual pressing electricity bill, repair that persistently leaky roof, or keep food on the table. This profound opportunity cost of early selling, driven by very real, undeniable liquidity needs and the relentless demands of survival, is, without question, one of the most underappreciated yet utterly decisive aspects of why tragically few early adopters genuinely manage to maximize the full, intoxicating potential of their theoretical 2012 Bitcoin fortunes, inadvertently stopping far, far short of the imagined summit. Even if, by some truly astounding feat of discipline, unfathomable luck, and immaculate self-preservation, you had miraculously managed to cling onto a substantial, truly meaningful amount of Bitcoin until it finally began its triumphant ascent, gracefully approaching genuinely life-altering valuations. The act of extracting that wealth, converting it into usable, tangible fiat currency, presented an entirely new, incredibly intricate, and often prohibitively costly set of unforeseen challenges. This wasn't a serene world of effortless, one-click sales smoothly deposited directly into your familiar bank account. The arduous process of methodically converting hundreds, thousands, or even, in the most ambitious fantasies, tens of thousands of your digital bitcoins into tangible fiat currency involved meticulously navigating a bewildering, treacherous web of complex fees, imposing regulatory hurdles, baffling legal ambiguities, and intricate market mechanics, all of which could, and almost certainly would, have significantly diminished your final, eagerly anticipated net worth. Firstly, let's revisit the operational landscape of the exchanges. While they were undeniably slowly evolving and gradually maturing beyond their initial, primitive stages, they still stubbornly presented immense, frustrating issues with liquidity, especially for large orders. If you found yourself metaphorically sitting on thousands of bitcoins and attempted, in a singular, dramatic swoop, to sell them all at once, particularly within markets far less developed and significantly thinner than today's vibrant digital arenas, you would invariably and disastrously encounter slippage. This insidious market phenomenon essentially means that your singular, massive sell order would inevitably, inexorably, drive the price down against itself. It would fulfill smaller, immediate orders at increasingly lower, progressively less favorable prices until your entire position was painfully liquidated, thereby effectively forcing you to sell a significant portion, potentially a huge percentage, of your holdings for far less than the initially advertised perceived market price. It's a bit like trying to gracefully exit a massively packed concert hall through a single, narrow fire escape door during a panicked evacuation. You'll inevitably be jostled, pushed, and ruthlessly squeezed, losing precious bits of your mental and financial comfort along the way. Secondly, let's address the persistent, draining reality of fees. While the very earliest, rudimentary exchanges might, on occasion, have offered slightly lower introductory trading fees than the more sophisticated platforms of today, these fees undeniably existed and continuously chipped away at your profits. More significantly, the monumental act of transferring truly large, life-changing sums of fiat money from a crypto exchange back into a traditional, established bank account often involved hefty, unavoidable wire transfer fees, and, crucially, would trigger extensive, often intrusive, and profoundly uncomfortable scrutiny from your long-standing, utterly bewildered bank. Traditional banks, by their very conservative nature, were, and sometimes bafflingly still are, inherently deeply suspicious of colossal inbound transfers emanating from obscure, unregulated, or crypt-related entities. This innate suspicion almost invariably led to agonizing, protracted delays, aggressive, demanding interrogations regarding the legitimate source of funds, or even, in the worst and most infuriating scenarios, an outright emphatic refusal to accept the entire transfer, citing ambiguous risk or compliance concerns. This profound, challenging exit ramp dilemma could effectively compel you to either laboriously sell your holdings in painstakingly smaller increments stretched out over a frustratingly long period, thereby exposing your capital to continued unpredictable market volatility for an extended duration, or force you to reluctantly absorb prohibitively higher fees just to expediently move larger lump sums. Thirdly, and perhaps most crushingly significant, are the immutable, ever-present forces of taxation. The precise moment you consciously convert cryptocurrency into fiat currency in most recognized jurisdictions, you unilaterally trigger a taxable event, specifically capital gains tax. While your initial 2012 investment might have been negligible, a mere blip on the financial radar, the subsequent capital gain realized from an investment made a decade ago would, for anyone who managed to truly hold, be unequivocally astronomical. Governments, being inherently slow and cautious entities, weren't particularly adept or clear on crypto taxation protocols in the nascent early 2010s. However, a lack of clarity certainly didn't and doesn't mean it wasn't rigorously taxable. By the time it came to meticulously convert your accumulated vast holdings into truly usable, spendable cash, the associated tax liability could easily amount to a staggering 15%, 20%, 30%, or even a truly eye-watering 40% or more, entirely contingent on your specific jurisdiction's tax laws, your overall income bracket, and the length of your holding period. What often appeared, in your enthusiastic calculations, to be a solid $1 million, $10 million, or $100 million profit on digital paper could, and certainly would, easily shrink by hundreds of thousands or millions once the omnipresent Internal Revenue Service, IRS, in the United States, or its formidable equivalents in other nations, inevitably came knocking, often with a demanding retroactive posture. Many truly pioneering early adopters, either due to a genuine lack of comprehensive understanding, the deliberate absence of clear governmental guidance, or perhaps even a willful ignorance driven by exuberance, tragically neglected to adequately account for this massive, often unforeseen tax burden. This oversight often led to monumental financial headaches, protracted legal battles, and, in many heartbreaking instances, forced liquidations of a portion of their remaining holdings years later, purely to belatedly cover the utterly unavoidable, often unexpected, and crushing costs. The sheer complexity, the unavoidable friction, and the significant financial expense embedded within the process of transforming abstract, theoretical digital wealth into truly tangible, spendable fiat riches fundamentally meant that the final net sum you could genuinely access and utilize would, by definition, be considerably, demonstrably less than the exhilarating peak valuation your mind had so readily, and perhaps naively, calculated in its wildest flights of fancy. The final exit, far from being a smooth, victorious parade, was often just as treacherous, if not significantly more perilous than the initial, daunting entry. Acquiring a significant fortune, even when that wealth exists purely in the abstract realm of theoretical valuations, is a deeply transformative experience that subtly yet profoundly reshapes one's entire existence in ways most ordinary people, caught in the everyday grind, never truly anticipate or comprehend. And when that burgeoning, increasingly substantial fortune is entirely denominated in a wildly volatile, historically misunderstood, and until recently relatively untraceable digital asset like early Bitcoin, the profound burden of that wealth takes on a sinister, multifaceted new dimension, all-consuming security and privacy concerns that could very easily become a relentless, corrosive force, robbing you of peace and joy. Once your initial, modest handful of bitcoins, cautiously acquired in 2012, meticulously nurtured and miraculously retained, metastasized into what, on paper, appeared to be millions of dollars in theoretical value, you instantaneously ceased to be an ordinary, anonymous person. You morphed, whether you embraced it or despised it, into an irresistible prime target. You became a living, breathing honeypot for every opportunistic scammer, every predatory criminal, and every covetous individual who could sniff out even a faint whiff of your burgeoning riches. In the prosaic physical realm, sudden, unexplained wealth often acts like a powerful magnet, inexorably drawing an unwelcome, often suffocating deluge of attention from overtly opportunistic individuals, subtly manipulative and disingenuous friends, both old and newly materialized, relentless gold diggers, and even outright dangerous criminals. Your sacred privacy is mercilessly eroded as hushed whispers, distorted rumors, and outright fabrications about your newfound good fortune spread with alarming speed through your social circles and beyond. But in the ephemeral, profoundly less forgiving digital realm, with Bitcoin specifically, these pre-existing threats of the physical world become exponentially more terrifying, more omnipresent, and potentially more destructive. Because of the inherent pseudonymity of Bitcoin's revolutionary blockchain, where every single transaction is meticulously and publicly recorded for eternity, but the true identity of the address's owners is not intrinsically linked to real-world identities, unless painstakingly forensically unmasked. Individuals who held large, early sums often inadvertently, perhaps unwittingly, revealed the precise extent of their massive holdings over time through various, often innocuous means. Perhaps they succumbed to a moment of weakness and bragged anonymously, or not so anonymously, on an obscure internet forum. Perhaps they became susceptible to identification through the uniquely detectable, almost fingerprint-like patterns of their early on-chain activity if they, out of inexperience or necessity, moved their coins frequently across different wallets or exchanges. This undeniable exposure, this subtle yet catastrophic loss of true anonymity, fundamentally transformed them into prime, irresistible targets for increasingly sophisticated and relentlessly persistent cyber attacks. Imagine, for a moment, the debilitating, omnipresent fear of a catastrophic hack. You'd live in constant, gnawing trepidation, visualizing yourself waking up one morning to find your entire digital fortune simply gone. The daily onslaught of relentless phishing attempts meticulously crafted and deployed to specifically target your primary email account, your social media profiles, or even, more insidiously, your physical mobile phone number, each fiendishly designed to subtly trick you into inadvertently revealing your sacrosanct private keys or precious seed phrase. The terrifying proliferation of specialized malware explicitly engineered to diligently scan your personal computer for encrypted wallet files or vulnerable login credentials. The nightmarish reality of SIM swap attacks, a truly chilling tactic where unscrupulous criminals either bribe or socially engineer telecom employees to illicitly transfer your mobile phone number, your digital identity, to a device they control, thereby granting them unhindered access to intercept crucial two-factor authentication codes and systematically drain all of your interconnected accounts. The resulting pervasive paranoia would be an immersive, suffocating, almost tangible presence, an unbearable weight on your soul. You would exist in a perpetual state of vigilance, a constant fear of irrevocably losing everything you had worked and persevered for, instantly snatched away by an anonymous hacker who could be located anywhere on the planet, operating with impunity and, crucially, without any recourse whatsoever. This terrifying scenario was fundamentally different from a traditional bank robbery, where your deposits are federally insured. Once your Bitcoin private keys are definitively compromised, your Bitcoin, and thus your fortune, is utterly and permanently gone, vanished into the ether, absolutely unrecoverable, leaving you financially destitute. Beyond the relentless digital threats, chilling stories, often shared in hushed, nervous tones within the tightly knit early crypto circles, though often remaining anecdotal and unverified, circulated with disturbing frequency. Tales of individuals known to possess substantial early Bitcoin holdings being physically coerced into revealing their private keys under duress, or even of brutal home invasions explicitly targeting identified or rumored early adopters. Protecting your precious privacy, not just your financial data but your very personal anonymity, would have necessarily evolved into a draining, emotionally exhausting, and overwhelmingly stressful full-time occupation. For many, the sheer crushing mental burden of constantly, diligently securing such a vast, tempting, and entirely self-custodied fortune without any safety net would have eventually proven psychologically unbearable. It's undeniably easy, with the luxurious detachment of hindsight, to romantically idealize the notion of quietly sitting on a mountain of digital millions, sipping lattes and observing your wealth grow. But the sobering grind in reality for many true early Bitcoin millionaires was far removed from such carefree fantasies. It was frequently one of quiet, pervasive, and profoundly isolating anxiety, a relentless fear of exposure, and a personal lifestyle meticulously dictated more by stringent, rigid security protocols and constant threat assessments than by spontaneous, luxurious indulgence or genuine freedom. The immense privacy costs, the security overhead, and the pervasive psychological drain associated with diligently holding truly substantial amounts of early Bitcoin often silently, invisibly eroded the very joy, the profound sense of liberation, and indeed the ultimate essence of the wealth itself. The freedom wealth supposedly buys would often be paradoxically constrained by the necessity of constant vigilance. The unwavering conviction known as diamond hands, the almost mythological, superhuman commitment to relentlessly hold on to an asset, come hell or high water, no matter how turbulent, how frightening, how despair-inducing the market conditions, is now enthusiastically celebrated in cryptocurrency folklore. It's romanticized, almost fetishized, as the ultimate hallmark of a true crypto titan. However, this triumphant narrative, for all its inspirational appeal, largely exists in a comfortable retrospect, meticulously polished by time and self-serving bravado. It almost always, by design, fails to fully and honestly capture the immense, soul-crushing psychological fortitude that was an absolute prerequisite to actually live through it, day after agonizing day, year after torturous year, particularly during the profoundly chaotic, dangerously unpredictable, and overwhelmingly uncertain early days of Bitcoin. Human psychology, it must be acknowledged, is notoriously, almost pathologically, ill-equipped at consistently performing perfectly rational, financially optimal actions, especially when placed under truly extreme, prolonged duress and existential pressure. Imagine, after somehow miraculously navigating all the aforementioned harrowing hurdles, the tortuous process of acquiring Bitcoin in its primitive state, the constant anxiety of securely storing it without robust infrastructure, surviving the morally staining stigma of the Silk Road's pervasive negativity, enduring the stomach-turning dread of the catastrophic Mt. Gox implosion, you then, astonishingly, find yourself staring directly at truly staggering, almost incomprehensible gains. Your initial $1,000 investment from the hopeful days of 2012 has now, perhaps with dizzying speed, swollen to an impressive $100,000, then majestically soared to $500,000, then finally burst through the seemingly impenetrable psychological barrier of $1 million, only to continue its improbable ascent towards $10 million, or even, in your wildest dreams, $100 million. At each and every single one of these monumental milestones, a deeply ingrained, almost primitive part of your brain, wired for survival and gratification, would shriek with overwhelming force. This is unequivocally enough. This is more than enough. Take the money. Flee with your profits. Remember, the ancient adage says no one, absolutely no one, ever went broke taking a profit. Lock it in. Seize this moment. The fundamental, ingrained fear of loss, a potent psychological force that, as elegantly explained by behavioral economics, is empirically twice as powerful and motivating as the symmetrical desire for potential gain, would inevitably become an overwhelming, paralyzing behemoth during inevitable market corrections. When your pristine, theoretical million-dollar portfolio, painstakingly built from digital dust, suddenly and violently dips back, with breathtaking speed, to a psychologically brutal $700,000, the gut-wrenching, almost irresistible urge to aggressively sell, to desperately prevent any further terrifying losses, would be an impulse so primal, so profoundly compelling, that it would unequivocally override any nuanced, long-term strategic thinking you had ever hoped to employ. This constant, relentless internal battle, a ceaseless, exhausting oscillation between moments of intense, intoxicating greed at market peaks and periods of profound, crippling, existential fear during painful corrections, would, without question, have been an utterly exhausting, spirit-sapping psychological ordeal. The retrospective, hindsight-driven regret of selling too early is, for most people, an abstract, hypothetical sorrow. But the immediate, visceral, palpable relief of locking in profits at a critical moment often proves to be exponentially more powerful, effortlessly outweighing the mere potential for theoretically greater future gains, especially in an era when absolutely no historical precedent existed for an asset as uniquely volatile and technologically uncertain as Bitcoin to simply continue its upward, parabolic climb indefinitely. The vast majority of people, myself firmly included, would have unequivocally formulated a definitive, comforting numerical target in their mind. If it hits $10,000 per coin, I'll sell precisely enough to finally purchase a comfortable mortgage-free house. Or, with grander ambition, if it hits an inconceivable $100,000, then absolutely I am definitively retiring, forever escaping the grind. The precise moment that psychologically satisfying target was heroically hit, the overwhelming temptation to actualize that deeply held dream, to instantly convert the abstract, theoretical numbers on a screen into something profoundly tangible and life-altering, would have been simply too potent, too universally human to genuinely resist. Holding steadfastly past these multitude of psychologically critical, often emotionally devastating milestones, enduring countless dead cat bounces, weathering prolonged, emotionally draining bear markets where prices frustratingly stagnated, sometimes for many long, hopeless years, demanded not just an extraordinary, almost fanatical conviction, but a deeply unnatural, almost stoic, pathological indifference to daily financial fluctuations, market sentiment, and the ceaseless clamor of public opinion, a quality that an infinitesimally small fraction of humans actually possess. The concept of the diamond hand is, in its essence, a mythical ideal, a retrospective wish, an aspirational legend, rather than a common observable reality for the vast, vast majority of pioneering early investors. Many, many individuals with absolute rational justification would have ultimately taken genuinely life-changing, but crucially not necessarily multi-billion-dollar, profits along their protracted journey, inadvertently and logically preventing themselves from reaching the stratospheric, almost impossible levels of wealth that the more recent, less emotionally scarred, later adopters now idly muse over. The deep, ingrained, often illogical psychology of steadfastly holding an asset with such extreme, utterly unprecedented and prolonged volatility for an entire decade, resisting every single biological urge to sell, to secure, to escape, is the single largest, most ruthless filter determining who truly made it in the Bitcoin saga, truly differentiating the mere fortunate from the absolutely legendary. Investing in early Bitcoin was, in its very essence, far more than just a detached, dispassionate investment decision. For many intrepid pioneers, it inadvertently and fundamentally transformed into their only significant overriding investment, leading them directly into the insidious, pervasive trap of the diversification dilemma. When a single, seemingly niche, highly speculative asset unexpectedly begins to demonstrate the kind of utterly dramatic, mind-bending, and genuinely unprecedented returns that Bitcoin so famously exhibited, it creates an intense, almost gravitational pull. All other conventional investment opportunities, however fundamentally sound or traditionally lucrative, suddenly and inevitably pale into pathetic insignificance when juxtaposed against this digital supernova, causing one's entire financial focus, one's singular burning ambition, to narrow dramatically, almost pathologically towards this lone electrifying phenomenon. If, hypothetically, you were one of the daring few who committed a mere $1,000 into Bitcoin in 2012, and then, with breathtaking speed, it blossomed into $10,000 by 2013, then further rocketed to an unimaginable $100,000 by late 2013, every other prosaic investment option, be it tried-and-true stocks, steady bonds, brick-and-mortar real estate, or even promising venture capital, would suddenly appear dull, slow, predictable, frustratingly mundane, and utterly uninspiring by comparison. The temptation, indeed, the overwhelming psychological compulsion, would be to ruthlessly consolidate everything, to unilaterally liquidate your carefully constructed, diversified portfolio, or to aggressively redirect every single incoming new capital allocation towards this single, all-conquering asset that had so unequivocally and dramatically proven its unparalleled exponential growth potential. This alluring yet fundamentally dangerous all-or-nothing approach, while undeniably holding the tantalizing potential for absolutely astronomical, mind-boggling returns if executed with precise surgical timing and endured with impossible stoicism, is also inherently, terrifyingly, incredibly risky. Diversification, in its purest essence, is not merely an esoteric financial theory. It is a fundamental, almost sacred principle of sound, prudent financial planning, precisely because its core purpose is to systematically mitigate and cleverly distribute risk across a spectrum of assets. By consciously choosing to concentrate all of your painstakingly accumulated wealth, or even a disproportionately large, strategically critical percentage of it, into a singular, undeniably volatile asset like early Bitcoin, you consciously or unconsciously exposed yourself to an immense, highly specific, and potentially catastrophic idiosyncratic risk that had the power to annihilate your entire fortune overnight. Had Bitcoin, in a plausible alternate timeline, ultimately failed, had it been globally and comprehensively banned by a concerted government crackdown, or had its nascent experimental technology proven fatally flawed, or simply fallen victim to a superior competitor, those pioneering early adopters who, against all rational advice, dared to place all their precious financial eggs into that one solitary digital basket would have been utterly, irrevocably wiped out, their dreams reduced to digital dust. This profound, almost inescapable psychological trap often manifested in early investors becoming so thoroughly enchanted by their initial, dazzling success with Bitcoin that they tragically, negligently, completely neglected to adequately balance or thoughtfully diversify their nascent portfolios. They didn't use their rapidly growing Bitcoin wealth as a strategic foundation to judiciously invest in more stable, traditional assets, acquire appreciating real estate, or even smartly allocate funds into other promising startups that also offered compelling, albeit less dramatic, returns. Instead, in a testament to the intoxicating allure of rapid gains, they proverbially doubled down, repeatedly throwing good money after digitally good, often viewing every single price correction or temporary market dip not as a warning, but as an irresistible opportunity to acquire even more of the only thing they now fanatically believed truly worked, the single solution to all their financial aspirations. This high-risk, high-reward strategy, while proving to be absolutely brilliant for a truly infinitesimal few individuals who possessed an almost prophetic vision and unparalleled iron resolve, also simultaneously created an immense, constant, corrosive level of both financial uncertainty and paralyzing mental stress. Furthermore, if you did, by some financial miracle, reach a point of genuinely significant wealth derived almost exclusively from Bitcoin, but only Bitcoin, you would still find yourself paradoxically lacking the stable, mature, widely diversified portfolio, typically and rationally associated with generational, enduring wealth. All your diligently amassed eggs remained nestled precariously in one extraordinarily volatile, fundamentally unpredictable digital basket, making long-term financial planning for critical life events, such as a secure retirement, robust health care for your elder years, or a tangible, protected inheritance for your children, exceptionally difficult and fraught with perennial uncertainty due to the asset's relentless, dizzying fluctuations. The intoxicating dream of immense, boundless wealth so often overlooks, or outright dismisses, the crucial, pragmatic financial wisdom and disciplined, diversified strategy that are absolutely essential to safely convert speculative gains into enduring, stable, and genuinely secure financial reality. The journey might have offered glimpses of billions, but a true foundation required far more than a singular bet. Long before Bitcoin achieved anything resembling mainstream acceptance, or became remotely accessible to anyone with just a smartphone and a passing interest, truly embodying the role of an early adopter in 2012, demanded a specialized, rigorous level of technical expertise and a unique aptitude for digital alchemy that precious few individuals possessed or could even readily acquire. This wasn't simply about the minor inconvenience of navigating a clunky, primitive online exchange with limited functionalities. It very often fundamentally necessitated a deep, hands-on, deeply intimate engagement with the esoteric underlying technology itself, transforming what started as a purely financial investment into an almost full-time, highly specialized technological undertaking. Consider, as a vivid and instructive example, the very real, grinding reality of mining. In the foundational year of 2012, long before the monstrous, power-hungry, purpose-built, application-specific integrated circuit, ASIC, miners violently elbowed everything else out of the arena and utterly dominated the computational landscape, it was still genuinely feasible, albeit increasingly challenging, to mine Bitcoin using nothing more than a powerful, high-end personal computer, specifically by harnessing the immense parallel processing power of its cutting-edge graphics processing unit, GPU. But make no mistake, this was emphatically not a passive, set-it-and-forget-it activity requiring minimal oversight. On the contrary, it was a deeply involved, incredibly demanding process that frequently pushed the limits of human patience and technical proficiency. It rigorously required a painstaking, meticulous selection of the precise, most optimal hardware components. The intricate, often frustrating installation of highly specialized, bespoke mining software, often developed by hobbyists and prone to bugs. The mandatory, technical, and often social act of joining tightly knit mining pools to collaboratively share computational effort and more consistently earn rewards. The arduous task of meticulously configuring and continually tweaking your entire system for maximal performance, which involved a deep understanding of clock speeds, voltage, and thermal management. And, invariably, the soul-crushing reality of ceaseless technical troubleshooting as hardware invariably failed or software inevitably crashed. The inherent learning curve for this particular brand of digital metallurgy was astronomically steep, bordering on vertical. You needed to possess at least a functional, foundational understanding of complex command line interfaces, intricate network settings, fundamental cryptographic concepts, and even basic Linux operating systems, merely to initiate the process, let alone sustain it effectively. Moreover, embarking on this early mining adventure came tethered with its own distinct and unavoidable set of very real financial costs and operational challenges that relentlessly gnawed at potential profits. The astronomical electricity bill incurred from running a high-powered, heat-generating gaming rig, bristling with multiple GPUs, operating full tilt 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, would very quickly swell to truly substantial sums, often eclipsing any perceived revenue, especially when Bitcoin's price remained frustratingly low for extended periods. The prodigious amounts of heat relentlessly generated by these perpetually overclocked components absolutely necessitated sophisticated, often custom-built, cooling solutions, pushing residential air conditioning units to their absolute breaking point or requiring dedicated ventilation setups. And the constant, punishing strain placed on these consumer-grade hardware components under relentless maximum load frequently led to premature and incredibly expensive component failures, reducing your digital gold rush to a frustrating cycle of repairs. An early adopter who enthusiastically engaged in mining, often driven by a cocktail of passion, idealism, and nascent greed, would perpetually find themselves in a relentless cycle of diligently purchasing costly new parts, grappling with stubbornly broken graphics cards, meticulously optimizing and re-optimizing their entire intricate setup. In essence, they were, often unknowingly, operating a complex, highly demanding, and technologically fragile small business burdened with enormous operating costs and technical headaches, all for relatively uncertain, incredibly volatile returns. For countless individuals, the sheer, crushing effort, the prodigious investment of irreplaceable time, the constant financial outlay for spiraling electricity costs and perpetually failing hardware, inextricably combined with the soul-sapping, unrelenting torrent of technical frustrations, simply, rationally outweighed any perceived or realized financial rewards. It wasn't a casual, enjoyable hobby, a weekend diversion. It was a grueling, intellectual deep dive into complex computer science and highly specialized electrical engineering, for rewards that fluctuated wildly and often vanished overnight. This formidable, often insurmountable technical barrier, acted as a potent, ruthless filter, systematically weeding out countless legions of potential early investors who might otherwise have been deeply interested in or vaguely amenable to accumulating Bitcoin. Those rare few who did commit to this arduous, thankless task not only exposed themselves to extraordinary financial risks, but also dedicated significant, irreplaceable portions of their lives to a relentlessly demanding technological endeavor, a hidden, often unspoken cost that is rarely, if ever, factored into the sanitized, retrospective glow of legendary early Bitcoin riches. Without this very specific, often painfully hands-on, deeply granular technical involvement, even merely acquiring the fundamental knowledge necessary to safely and prudently self-custody or confidently utilize Bitcoin in its rudimentary, primitive state would have remained a significant exclusionary barrier to entry for most. It was a digital wilderness for the exceptionally skilled, not a paved road for the masses. The ever-present, insidious specter of regulatory uncertainty cast an immense, pervasive shadow over the heads of early Bitcoin holders, often proving to be a silent, profoundly debilitating force that frequently led to fear-driven, premature selling and a crippling sense of existential dread. In the formative year of 2012, and indeed for many protracted years thereafter, governments, venerable central banks, powerful financial institutions, and bewildered legislative bodies across the globe simply existed in a state of utter, bewildered confusion about the very nature and legitimate place of Bitcoin. Was it to be classified as a legitimate currency, legally circulating money capable of purchasing goods and services? Was it a speculative, perhaps valuable, financial asset akin to a commodity or a digital gold? Could it, by some stretch, be considered a security, thereby falling under the draconian oversight of existing securities laws? Or was it nothing more than a cleverly disguised, nefarious Ponzi scheme, a criminal enterprise designed purely to defraud unsuspecting individuals? The answer, for the overwhelming majority of bewildered regulators and lawmakers, was a resounding, fear-inducing, and utterly unhelpful. We literally have no definitive idea what this thing is, but what we do know fills us with immense, overriding concern. This pervasive, profoundly troubling ambiguity, this critical absence of any meaningful legal framework, led to a chaotic, ever-shifting patchwork of confusing, often diametrically contradictory, or entirely non-existent regulatory guidelines emanating from various, often conflicting, jurisdictions. Every tentative pronouncement from a prominent financial authority, every highly publicized parliamentary debate about digital currencies, or even every carefully worded, cautious statement issued by a powerful central bank regarding Bitcoin's future potential, or lack thereof, would send profound ripples of visceral anxiety and mounting apprehension throughout the nascent crypto community, causing prices to swing wildly on the news of proposed restrictions or looming crackdowns. The ever-present, terrifying fear of an outright sweeping governmental ban on Bitcoin was an intensely palpable, genuinely stomach-turning concern for any thoughtful holder. What existential crisis would unfold if a major global economy, say the United States, or the European Union, or China, collectively or individually decided to unilaterally declare Bitcoin completely illegal, its very existence prohibited within their sovereign borders? What devastating consequences would ensue if they simply resolved to actively shut it down, perhaps through comprehensive legislative action, aggressive enforcement, or technical sabotage. Such a draconian move, even if proven incredibly difficult, perhaps technically impossible, to enforce completely and perfectly on a global scale, would undeniably tank Bitcoin's price to unprecedented lows and, crucially, make it practically impossible to legally use, transact with, or ultimately sell for the majority of the mainstream participants. News headlines detailing potential regulatory crackdowns, highly publicized government investigations into struggling exchanges or mining operations, or thinly veiled legislative attempts to aggressively tax or regulate it out of meaningful existence, ceaselessly instilled a pervasive, soul-sapping sense of existential insecurity among its holders. People were consumed by genuine worry. Could their carefully acquired assets somehow be unilaterally frozen, indiscriminately seized, or, most terrifyingly, instantly become utterly worthless overnight due to an unforeseen, politically motivated governmental decree? Unlike established traditional investments, stocks, bonds, real estate, which operated, for better or worse, under centuries of meticulously refined, deeply entrenched legal frameworks, Bitcoin, in those formative years, existed precariously in a perpetually vulnerable legal gray area. A true digital Wild West where the rules of engagement could be unilaterally invented, drastically changed, or entirely rescinded at any unpredictable moment, often without any meaningful prior warning or recourse. This crippling lack of clear, consistent legal clarity fundamentally meant that even if you harbored an almost fanatical belief in Bitcoin's revolutionary long-term potential, the persistent, overriding, soul-crushing fear of sudden, sweeping, and overwhelmingly adverse regulatory action constantly overshadowed the intoxicating allure of potential gains. It exerted immense, almost unbearable psychological pressure on holders, impelling them to preemptively sell and de-risk before a theoretical, politically motivated prohibition could magically transform their potential millions into completely worthless digital dust, rendering their years of perseverance futile. This profound and unique stress wasn't merely about cyclical market crashes that eventually rebound. It was about the very fundamental, existential legitimacy and ultimate longevity of the digital asset itself in the suspicious, often hostile, eyes of the global power structures. The crushing weight of this regulatory uncertainty contributed immeasurably to the immense selling pressure acutely felt by pioneering early investors, mercilessly eroding their unwavering conviction and drastically reducing the already small likelihood of finding those elusive, truly long-term diamond hands. It unequivocally required an almost radical, anti-establishment, highly defiant worldview to truly dismiss and disregard these omnipresent, psychologically devastating external threats, transforming holding Bitcoin into a profoundly political as well as financial act. Imagine, if you will, the intricate, treacherous social labyrinth one is forced to navigate after unexpectedly and quite dramatically coming into immense wealth, especially when that newfound fortune has materialized from such a profoundly misunderstood and, historically speaking, controversial digital asset as early Bitcoin. The ubiquitous Lamborghini effect, that highly publicized, instantly recognizable, external manifestation of conspicuous consumption, is merely the superficial, public-facing symptom of this entirely new status. Yet, it only vaguely scratches the surface of the myriad social pressures, profound expectations, subtle resentments, and unforeseen responsibilities that would have inevitably, insidiously, relentlessly chipped away at your hard-won fortune, or at the very least severely eroded your hard-earned peace of mind and sense of normalcy. Firstly, and perhaps most immediately, there's the distinct possibility, if not the profound inevitability, of being systematically ostracized from a world that, for the most part, simply doesn't understand, and worse, deeply resents your sudden, almost magical, good fortune. For many grinding, thankless years, you might have been dismissively caricatured as either outright crazy, laughably naive, or hopelessly deluded for audaciously investing in internet money, a speculative folly with no real-world value. Now, with a seemingly overnight flip of the digital switch, you're ostensibly, or actually, rich. This abrupt metamorphosis in perceived status invariably transforms you into an object of intense suspicion, simmering envy, profound jealousy, or, in the worst cases, outright thinly veiled disdain from old friends, skeptical family, and every single acquaintance. Your previously comfortable social dynamics are fundamentally shattered. Old, cherished friendships and established family ties might look at you with an unnerving, almost predatory new gaze, one colored by avarice or thinly veiled resentment. You become, often without warning, a literal walking ATM, a potential panacea, a seemingly endless fount of financial solutions for everyone else's suddenly overwhelming monetary problems. The incessant barrage of calls, emails, text messages, and direct appeals, demanding generous loans, unsolicited investment opportunities, dubious charitable contributions, or outright blatant monetary gifts, would be constant, suffocating, and unrelenting. The emotional toll of diligently setting firm boundaries, of consistently and unequivocally saying no to increasingly desperate or manipulative pleas, would strain cherished relationships to their absolute breaking point, often resulting in permanent, painful estrangements. This emotional drainage is an immense, underappreciated burden that most individuals are simply ill-equipped, both psychologically and experientially, to competently handle. Conversely, there's the subtle yet potent pressure, both internal and external, to actively maintain an outward image of newly acquired, unmistakable success. This might manifest in an almost irresistible compulsion to ostentatiously flaunt your burgeoning, sometimes dizzying wealth with overt luxury purchases, expensive hobbies, and opulent displays. This, despite the gnawing, internalized knowledge of the extreme volatility of your primary illiquid asset. This temptation isn't merely about idly contemplating the purchase of a sleek, expensive sports car for pure self-indulgence. It quickly escalates to acquiring vastly larger homes in more exclusive neighborhoods, fundamentally altering and upgrading your entire social circle, embarking on incredibly elaborate and expensive, seemingly endless travel excursions, and cultivating an insatiable taste for designer goods and gourmet experiences. All of these lifestyle inflation changes, while initially gratifying, inevitably lead to a significantly increased personal burn rate, a profound escalation in your annual expenditures that, paradoxically, makes it increasingly difficult to responsibly save, thoughtfully reinvest, or prudently manage your wealth over the long term. Every visible, tangible sign of your ostensible wealth, especially if your origin story somehow leaks out to the wider public, which it inevitably does, only serves to further intensify this mounting pressure, relentlessly attracting even more unwelcome, potentially dangerous attention from the financially desperate, the morally opportunistic, or, even more menacingly, outright predatory individuals who view your newfound prosperity as their own personal golden goose to exploit. The sheer, overwhelming, pervasive anxiety of perpetually navigating these tumultuous new social dynamics, desperately protecting your hard-won privacy from all angles, and constantly managing the often wildly unrealistic expectations from every single person in your orbit can, and frequently does, become as profoundly debilitating, as psychologically draining, as any direct financial loss itself. Many pioneering early Bitcoin investors, unprepared for this multifaceted onslaught, likely found themselves caught in an agonizing double bind, either maintaining their deliberately humble, inconspicuous lifestyle while secretly holding an immense but volatile fortune, a choice leading to profound psychological friction and a constant sense of incongruence, or tragically succumbing to the overwhelming social pressures of newly acquired riches and inadvertently, yet systematically, depleting their digital fortune through reckless, unchecked spending, overly generous gifts that went unappreciated, or their tragic susceptibility to countless scams shrewdly pitched by a burgeoning professional class of opportunistic hangers-on. The immeasurable psychological cost of gracefully, responsibly handling such unexpected, revolutionary wealth, particularly if you are not adequately equipped with prior experience, comprehensive financial literacy, or an unwavering moral compass, often silently, invisibly subtracts from your actual net worth. Not just in tangible financial terms, but devastatingly, in your emotional tranquility and social fabric. It can become truly a gilded cage. It's tempting, when retrospectively analyzing such historical financial phenomena, to merely look back at the past and uncritically apply present-day values and spending power, implicitly equating the numerical value of wealth across different eras. However, to genuinely, truly grasp why your 2012 Bitcoin wealth, even if somehow miraculously retained, might not actually stretch quite as far or yield the lavish lifestyle your mind so eagerly imagines, we must consciously, critically consider the often overlooked yet profoundly powerful, insidious forces of inflation and the constantly shifting realities of purchasing power parity. A dollar in the economy of 2012, both qualitatively and quantitatively, simply did not possess the same inherent value or purchasing capacity as a dollar does in the economy of today, 2025. Conversely, what a Bitcoin could tangibly buy at its various historical price points, then, compared to what it might theoretically buy at today's peak valuations, represents an incredibly complex and constantly moving economic equation. Even if your meticulously acquired Bitcoin holdings had, defying all expectations and overcoming every imaginable hurdle, skyrocketed in nominal price over the past decade, the grim reality is that the baseline cost of living, and crucially, the ubiquitous prices of virtually all goods and services, have also marched inexorably upward, inflating steadily, sometimes even dramatically over the same 10 to 13-year period. The modest suburban home that you could realistically have purchased for, say, $200,000 in 2012 might now, in many thriving competitive housing markets across the developed world, command an asking price of $400,000, or even, staggeringly, more than $600,000. A brand new car, fresh off the assembly line, is unequivocally and demonstrably more expensive today. The astronomical, continuously climbing cost of higher education, the ever-escalating expenses of comprehensive health care, and the persistently rising prices of fundamental, everyday essentials like groceries, utilities, and transportation have all diligently, relentlessly, and collectively surged upward. So, while your initial, modest Bitcoin investment did indeed grow nominally, geometrically, exponentially in fiat terms, often by astronomical orders of magnitude, its real purchasing power, its tangible capacity to buy actual goods and services in the contemporary economy, might not have maintained perfect parity or consistently kept pace with your mental, idealized fantasy of boundless affluence. The initial, tantalizing dream of acquiring early Bitcoin was not merely about possessing large numbers on a digital screen. It was fundamentally about the liberating potential to buy anything, possess everything, or definitively retire with millions, unshackled by financial constraints. But $1 million in the economic climate of 2012 possessed significantly more actual economic heft, purchasing unequivocally more in terms of real goods, essential services, and luxury experiences than $1 million commands today due to the inexorable, silent erosion of inflation. This isn't crucially to argue that Bitcoin's truly astronomical, once-in-a-generation gains didn't utterly and comprehensively outpace the cumulative effects of inflation. Of course, they did so by orders of magnitude beyond any traditional asset. However, if you consider a plausible, emotionally driven, and far more likely earlier exit point, say, intelligently converting a substantial portion of your Bitcoin into a very respectable $500,000 in the relative calm of 2017, that precise sum, when rigorously adjusted for a subsequent 5 or more years of persistent inflation and relentless market changes, would effectively feel much smaller, possess demonstrably less real-world purchasing capability today than it would have during that exit year. Furthermore, during the extensive period you were theoretically holding your highly volatile Bitcoin, the broader global economic landscape was anything but static. It was dynamic, continually shifting, evolving, and offering its own parallel streams of wealth creation. Other major economies were consistently booming. Vibrant property markets were inexorably soaring, and a multitude of conventional investments were quietly, patiently, steadily compounding returns through the decade. Your opportunity cost in this intricate scenario isn't solely about missing out on Bitcoin's most dramatic, eye-popping peaks. It's also profoundly about potentially missing out on the stable, diversified, steady growth offered elsewhere. The subjective perception of being rich is almost always intrinsically tied to a contemporary, socially acceptable standard of living, implicitly defined by the constantly escalating prices of the present day. Thus, a sum of money, even one that has numerically grown tremendously and demonstrably, might, for a thoughtful, prudent individual, ultimately fail to fully stretch to encompass the truly lavish, almost mythological lifestyle that our collective imaginations so readily, almost carelessly, attribute to a fictional Bitcoin millionaire of today. This crucial, often unaddressed disconnect between purely nominal monetary value and its actual real-world purchasing power in an ever-inflating economy is a subtle yet incredibly profound factor in understanding precisely why the grand dream of early Bitcoin wealth, even if it were magically realized in full, would still likely not equate to the utterly boundless, hedonistic riches our untamed imaginations consistently conjured up from the vantage point of today's inflated prices. It starkly highlights the indispensable importance of evaluating genuine, tangible value against the relentless, corrosive pressures of inflationary forces, a silent thief that reduces even massive paper gains over time. One of the most profound, yet often unexamined, limitations and constraints that inherently capped the ceiling for those aspiring to the mythical, utterly fantastical 2012 Bitcoin wealth is the cold, immutable, unshakable reality of initial capital. When most individuals, in their enthusiastic daydreams, envision their hypothetical future riches born of early crypto investment, their thoughts almost universally gravitate towards a seemingly simple, yet deeply flawed premise. If only I had possessed the wisdom to purchase 1,000 or even 5,000 bitcoins for just a single dollar each back then, I would unequivocally possess a staggering fortune now, literally overflowing with millions. But the utterly critical, fundamentally clarifying question, the linchpin of this entire discussion, that consistently remains unanswered and inconveniently ignored is this: how many ordinary people, residing anywhere on the globe in 2012, genuinely possessed enough readily disposable income, enough surplus capital, an adequately large appetite for astronomical risk, an almost pathological level of sheer, raw foresight, and a singular, unshakable conviction to realistically and boldly invest what was, in that era, undoubtedly considered a substantial, indeed almost reckless, amount, into such an unbelievably fringe, profoundly unproven, wildly misunderstood, and notoriously speculative asset. The sobering, uncomfortable answer, for the overwhelming majority of humankind, is a stark, resounding, unequivocally humbling not much, or more accurately, almost none at all. Most individuals who, in an act of speculative bravado, dare to dabble in deeply new, exceptionally risky, and historically unprecedented investments like early Bitcoin, do so with nothing more than cautious pocket change. A small, negligible sum, sometimes no more than $20 or $50, that they are intellectually, if not emotionally, fully prepared to lose entirely without batting an eye. This calculated, psychologically hedged bet is the common mode. Could you, personally, looking into your heart of hearts and your bank balance from 2012, have genuinely, confidently emptied your entire life savings, methodically liquidated your meager existing assets, or daringly taken out potentially ruinous high-interest loans, just to invest a daunting $10,000 or even a mere $1,000 into something that a staggering 99% of the world's informed population and every mainstream financial expert vehemently deemed to be unequivocally worthless, fundamentally unsustainable, or an outright scam? For many, perhaps most of us, a truly substantial frontier investment of $50, a cautious $100, or perhaps a daring maximum of $500, would have been considered an extremely bold, borderline reckless, speculative maneuver, already pushing the very boundaries of personal financial responsibility. Let's, for argument's sake and in a moment of generous speculation, imagine you took an already exceptional leap of faith and bravely committed a relatively generous $500 into Bitcoin when it tantalizingly hovered at $5 per coin. In this fortunate, albeit aggressive scenario, you would have successfully acquired a still substantial 100 precious BTC. While a holding of 100 BTC today has, unequivocally, blossomed into an astounding, truly life-altering sum that few can comprehend. It fundamentally pales in comparison to the multi-thousand BTC bags, the genuinely mythological, mind-bogglingly large hoards that form the foundational bedrock of truly incomprehensible, stratospheric, mind-altering fortunes we sometimes hear about in legends. Those colossal holdings, the truly vast digital treasuries that translate into tens or hundreds of millions, or even billions of today's fiat, almost universally belonged to either extremely early miners who literally earned it computationally for minimal cost, the very core of the early development team who were granted or gifted tokens, or an infinitesimally tiny handful of truly audacious visionary, perhaps borderline insane, investors who had the almost superhuman nerve to consciously sink their entire existing net worth, or an even more significant sum, into Bitcoin when its value was not just dollars but mere fractions of a cent. This particular leap of psychological faith, this unquantifiable act of audacious conviction, is one that the overwhelming majority of sane human beings could simply never, ever, under any conceivable circumstances, rationally or emotionally make. Therefore, the very fundamental premise of the universally appealing dream, that somehow, by sheer dumb luck, one would simply stumble into possessing an unbelievably large, functionally limitless number of bitcoins acquired in the deepest troughs, is almost always tragically predicated on a profoundly unrealistic assessment of one's own deeply ingrained risk tolerance, one's financial bandwidth, and, critically, one's actual available capital during that nascent, primitive period of Bitcoin's existence. The immutable constraint of initial financial capacity was, for the vast majority of ordinary people, a natural, undeniable governor on the ultimate extent of their theoretical future wealth, systematically limiting their financial ceiling long before the twin forces of extreme price volatility or intricate psychological hurdles even had a chance to decisively come into play. The genuine potential to become rich from early Bitcoin was undeniably always a remote possibility, a tempting glimmer on the distant horizon, but the profound potential to become unbelievably wealthy, the kind of wealth that irrevocably alters family legacies and global dynamics, was mostly, almost exclusively, reserved for those impossibly few who, whether by design or sheer madness, undertook truly insane, arguably reckless, bordering on pathological levels of early financial exposure. Their journey wasn't about cautious investment. It was an act of extreme, unparalleled, and largely unprecedented financial self-immolation or spectacular triumph. The journey of the early Bitcoin investor, even if ultimately deemed outwardly successful, often unfolded amidst a profound and debilitating paradox. The simultaneous, dizzying abundance of seemingly infinite, glittering opportunities juxtaposed against the constant, gnawing specter of making the wrong choice, an error that could retrospectively appear colossal. This insidious phenomenon, eloquently captured by the psychological principle known as the paradox of choice, dictates that when individuals are confronted with an overwhelming multitude of pathways, even ones that could all lead to positive, successful outcomes, the human mind can paradoxically become plagued by a paralyzing cocktail of doubt, gnawing regret, crippling indecision, and the relentless, haunting question of, what if I had simply chosen differently? Was my decision optimal? Could I have done more? During the tumultuous, transformative decade, you were hypothetically steadfastly holding your meticulously acquired 2012 Bitcoin. The overarching world of cutting-edge technology and rapidly evolving finance was moving at an accelerating, breakneck pace, generating an unending cascade of new possibilities. Bitcoin itself, a foundational pioneer, spawned a literal legion of derivative digital assets, a myriad of altcoins numbering in the thousands. Some of these offspring optimistically promised truly revolutionary technological advancements that aimed to fundamentally disrupt existing paradigms, while countless others proved to be nothing more than elaborate, fleeting scams, artfully designed to separate the unwary from their hard-won capital. Would you, as an early Bitcoin holder, having demonstrated foresight once, have been tempted, perhaps irresistibly, to methodically diversify into these other intriguing, often heavily hyped, emerging digital assets? To metaphorically play the field in the burgeoning, electrifying, yet wildly chaotic new crypto space, perhaps strategically reallocating a carefully calculated portion of your burgeoning Bitcoin into a seemingly promising altcoin project that, over time, eventually and silently fizzled out, becoming obsolete, a forgotten footnote in crypto history? Or consider the robust, seemingly unstoppable traditional stock market that boomed relentlessly throughout the majority of the 2010s, consistently rewarding patient investors. As your diligently accumulated Bitcoin holdings repeatedly soared to dizzying heights, only to violently crash back to earth in a breathtaking display of volatility, did the insidious thought ever cross your mind to extract some of those hard-earned digital profits and strategically reinvest them into the established, financially stable, and steadily compounding giants of the tech world? Household names like Apple, Amazon, or Google, each of which also experienced its own monumental, multi-year parabolic gains during the same period. Real estate markets in booming metropolitan areas, tantalizing venture capital opportunities flowing into the next generation of startups, or other truly disruptive technologies beyond crypto, like the burgeoning fields of artificial intelligence and biotechnology. Each of these represented a vibrant, alternative universe of potential, tangible wealth creation, a parallel path to financial freedom. The overwhelming, intoxicating feeling of being at the very cutting edge of a technological revolution, of being fundamentally ahead of the curve with Bitcoin, could somewhat paradoxically lead to a form of dangerous intellectual myopia. This narrowed focus might have unconsciously caused one to dismiss or outright ignore other, potentially more stable, demonstrably less volatile, or arguably equally lucrative traditional investment avenues that offered more consistent, albeit less flashy, compounding returns. The complex choice in this scenario wasn't simply the straightforward, binary decision to single-mindedly hold onto your Bitcoin at all costs, come what may. Implicitly, profoundly, it was also the conscious decision not to invest diligently elsewhere, not to rigorously explore a plethora of other equally legitimate and potentially immensely profitable emerging opportunities that, taken individually or collectively, also offered truly life-changing, perhaps even less stressful returns over the same period. And the bitter sting of future regret isn't always exclusively about selling one's Bitcoin too prematurely. It can also be equally, if not more, agonizingly about holding on to it, sometimes for protracted periods, through punishingly long, despair-inducing corrections when, in hindsight, one could have intelligently leveraged that significant initial capital derived from their first major Bitcoin gains into an entirely different, perhaps less volatile and equally lucrative venture that would have returned a comparable, or perhaps even a greater, amount of tangible, easily usable wealth, but with significantly less stomach-churning volatility and incomparably less debilitating mental anguish. The profound psychological burden of not only diligently identifying, but then with unwavering stoic resolve, steadfastly committing to a singular, perfectly optimal investment strategy for an entire arduous decade, all while navigating an explosively evolving financial and technological landscape that constantly presented new, glittering distractions and tantalizing alternatives, would have been nothing short of psychologically exhausting. A relentless intellectual battle against endless temptation. Many would have inevitably, understandably, succumbed to what behavioral psychologists call analysis paralysis, ceaselessly chasing smaller, seemingly easier gains in myriad other lesser projects, or making poor, ill-conceived diversifications that, taken together, ultimately and inadvertently diluted their monumental early Bitcoin advantage, constantly, anxiously second-guessing their initial, profound, once unshakable commitment to the seemingly singular orange digital coin. The illusion of a singular linear path to wealth obscured the labyrinth of alternatives and their seductive calls. Beyond all the purely financial, logistical, and technical hurdles that relentlessly confronted the early Bitcoin investor, perhaps the most profound, yet often utterly unexamined, reason why many pioneers would definitively not have been as rich as you think lies in the crushing, indelible impact of the sheer mental and emotional toll of the journey itself. Imagine, for a moment, the insidious, unrelenting exhaustion of living every single day, month, and year for an entire, arduous decade, under the suffocating weight of such extreme market volatility, a ceaseless barrage of withering skepticism from every direction, paralyzing regulatory uncertainty from governmental bodies, and the terrifying, omnipresent threat of catastrophic hacks and outright loss. This isn't merely a detached, intellectually stimulating investment. It relentlessly transmutes itself into a persistent, pervasive, and corrosive source of deep-seated stress, free-floating anxiety, profound paranoia, and even, for some, a creeping existential dread. The periods of rapid, parabolic ascent, while undeniably exhilarating, inducing manic euphoria and intoxicating visions of grandeur, would have been almost perfectly, chillingly, geometrically matched by breathtaking, gut-wrenching, violently precipitous crashes. Each exhilarating market peak, swelling your digital fortune on screen, would be accompanied by a surge of manic excitement, a powerful, intoxicating feeling of unassailable genius, instantaneously followed by dizzying, nauseating, vertiginous drops that would, without mercy, plunge you headfirst into the abyss of profound despair, soul-crushing doubt, relentless self-recrimination, and debilitating anxiety. The internal monologue, that incessant, torturous voice in your head, would have been nothing short of mentally exhausting. Should I decisively sell now before it's too late, or hold on for even more? Is this it? Is it irrevocably going to zero this time, validating all the skeptics? Am I truly a stubborn fool for holding this increasingly insane position for so unbelievably long against all rational advice? Is this agonizingly slow ascent finally, definitively the top? Should I exit before the crash? Why, oh why, didn't I sell more, or all of it, when it was unimaginably higher just last month? This ceaseless, relentless internal battle, an excruciating tug-of-war against the intoxicating siren call of FOMO, fear of missing out, at the speculative highs, and the chilling, paralyzing grip of FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt, at the terrifying lows, would have mercilessly, inexorably, systematically eroded your mental well-being over the vast expanse of time, consuming your peace and tranquility like a slow-burning fire. Furthermore, the inherent philosophical tenets of anonymity and radical decentralization that defined early Bitcoin, while undoubtedly intellectually appealing and ideologically potent, also presented a terrifying, cold reality. A complete and utter absence of any of the comforting safety nets, the institutionalized backstops, and the human support systems that we have, as modern citizens come to implicitly expect from the traditional, established financial infrastructure. There existed no soothing FDIC or SIPC insurance protecting your digital deposits, no empathetic customer support helpline to patiently guide you through a crisis, no benevolent financial regulator to appeal to when you believed you had been wronged. If, in a moment of inexperience, carelessness, or bad luck, you made a catastrophic mistake, such as irrevocably losing a crucial private key, making an unrecoverable, mistaken transaction to the wrong address, or succumbing to an elaborate phishing scam, it was, with absolute certainty, utterly irreversible and unequivocally permanent. Your wealth was simply gone, unredeemable. This profound, overwhelming sense of absolute, terrifying personal responsibility for what amounted to many millions of dollars on the line could, with horrifying ease, systematically foster and ingrain a deeply corrosive, paralyzing, and self-perpetuating sense of paranoia. Who, truly, unequivocally knew that you possessed such immense, tempting, anonymous wealth in Bitcoin? Were unknown, malicious hackers actively targeting your every move, lurking in the digital shadows, waiting for your single moment of vulnerability? Was the omnipresent, all-seeing eye of the government subtly, discreetly watching your digital footprint, recording your every transaction? This relentless, pervasive psychological pressure, this incessant gnawing anxiety, isn't a cost that is conveniently visible on a price chart, neatly quantified in an annual report. But it is, without a doubt, a very real, tangible, profoundly destructive drain on one's overall quality of life and fundamental human well-being. The vast mental bandwidth that was mercilessly consumed by these spiraling anxieties, the countless hours of lost, restless sleep, the inevitably strained or fractured relationships that resulted from either excessive secrecy or the sudden jarring shifts in your perceived or actual financial status. These are all pervasive, invisible, yet profoundly damaging taxes on your true wealth, paid in emotional and psychological currency. Genuine richness, authentic human flourishing, isn't merely about the gargantuan numerical value displayed in your digital account balance. It is, more profoundly, about the sweet serenity of peace of mind, the liberating absence of soul-crushing financial stress, and the uninhibited, unconstrained ability to truly, meaningfully enjoy the fleeting preciousness of life without a constant existential weight. For countless early Bitcoin investors, even the truly successful ones, the arduous journey of accumulation and retention would have morphed into a high-stakes, intensely stressful psychological war of attrition, a protracted battle of nerves, doubt, and self-preservation, potentially leaving them theoretically rich in digital assets, but tragically, utterly impoverished in peace, tranquility, and emotional contentment. The ultimate, usable wealth that any real individual retained at the end of such a monumental struggle might, in fact, have been significantly, dramatically offset and overshadowed by the crippling psychological debt irrevocably incurred along the way, a burden carried silently for years. Ultimately, my dear listeners, revisiting and meticulously dissecting the pervasive illusion of acquiring immense, life-altering Bitcoin wealth from a solitary purchase back in 2012 reveals a profound, enduring, and sobering lesson. A lesson that transcends mere financial speculation. That true richness, or genuine, authentic financial well-being in its most holistic sense, encompasses an infinitely vaster, more intricate, and nuanced reality than the simplistic, mechanistic multiplication of a single, wildly volatile asset's numerical price. It is not merely about numbers on a screen. It is, fundamentally, about achieving an enduring sense of stability, experiencing the deep serenity of peace of mind, cultivating a robustly diversified portfolio of tangible and intangible assets, enjoying excellent physical and mental health, and fostering strong, meaningful relationships with loved ones that remain untainted and uncorrupted by the insidious, pervasive influence of money. Our collective, tantalizing mental simulation of perfectly acquiring Bitcoin in 2012 and miraculously transforming into an unfathomably wealthy titan of industry today is, almost without exception, deeply flawed, romantically oversimplified, and fundamentally disconnected from human reality. This pervasive yet dangerous fantasy consciously or unconsciously strips away all the messy, unpredictable, inconvenient, and profoundly human elements of the arduous passage of time, the inherent, ever-present risks involved in any investment, the paralyzing grip of deep-seated fear, the intoxicating allure of unchecked greed, the brutal logistical challenges of a nascent technology, and, crucially, the overwhelming, relentless psychological burden that would relentlessly fall upon any ordinary individual attempting such a feat. It axiomatically assumes an almost impossibly perfect, entirely emotionless, robotic, hodling strategy, a miraculous, unwavering commitment executed flawlessly by an entirely hypothetical individual endowed with infinite, unshakable patience, prophetic foresight, a lifetime's worth of highly specialized technical expertise, and most incredibly, possessing absolutely no pressing financial needs or earthly desires for an uninterrupted period exceeding an entire decade. Such a perfectly rational, stoic, superhuman investor simply does not exist within the messy, unpredictable confines of actual human reality. The polished, triumphant narrative we've meticulously explored tonight systematically, forensically, and unequivocally dismantles this deceptively simple, if only, fantasy. It achieves this by mercilessly revealing the true, punishing gauntlet that had to be traversed, the almost impossible practicalities and insurmountable technical difficulties of early, primitive acquisition, the soul-crushing ordeal of surviving relentless multi-year bear markets, and the catastrophic, institution-shattering events like the implosion of the Mt. Gox, the constant internal battle against crippling regulatory uncertainty, and a relentlessly negative, demonizing public perception. The bewildering task of mastering arcane, complex digital security protocols to protect one's fortune from anonymous digital predators. And, perhaps most powerfully, the profoundly human struggle to constantly resist the primal, overwhelming urge to immediately take life-altering profits, to solve tangible, real-world needs that arose again and again, rather than patiently, impossibly wait for the theoretical maximal future gain. We've meticulously illuminated precisely how forces like draconian taxation, insidious social pressures from jealous friends and desperate family, and the slow, unseen erosion of persistent inflation could relentlessly chip away at even the most colossal, hypothetical paper fortunes, transforming digital billions into much more modest, albeit still significant, tangible wealth. The irrefutable reality, a truth borne out by historical observation and an understanding of human nature, is that the actual usable wealth, the true, spendable, liquid riches that any real, flesh-and-blood person could have plausibly extracted and meaningfully retained from a solitary 2012 Bitcoin purchase would, almost certainly, have been considerably, demonstrably, significantly less than the intoxicating, fantastical, multi-billion-dollar figures that our hyperactive imaginations effortlessly calculate in the comfort of 2020 hindsight. For the vast, overwhelming majority of individuals, whether they were driven by a shrewd understanding of market cycles or simply by a primal need for security, rationally taking genuinely life-changing, but crucially, not necessarily world-altering, profits would have been the overwhelmingly logical, the profoundly sensible, and, more importantly, the psychologically unavoidable course of action long before Bitcoin achieved its most dramatic, parabolic, truly incomprehensible rallies that made modern headlines. The ultimate financial wisdom, the deep, enduring truth gleaned from this extended, intellectually challenging thought experiment, is that sophisticated diversification, profoundly prudent risk management strategies, realistic expectations grounded in tangible reality, and most fundamentally, unwavering mental fortitude and a deep understanding of human psychology are, unequivocally, as crucial, if not infinitely more so, than merely correctly picking a winning asset decades in advance. Genuine, enduring wealth, in its truest, most fulfilling sense, allows for unparalleled freedom and robust security without the crushing weight of constant paranoia, overwhelming anxiety, and unrelenting stress. It is built patiently, steadily, meticulously. It is diversified strategically across multiple asset classes. It is nurtured and managed with deep-seated wisdom, meticulous planning, and mature foresight. It is profoundly, not simply stumbled upon or acquired through a singular, decades-long, agonizingly volatile gamble, no matter how profoundly prescient that initial bet might have seemed in the warm glow of retrospective success. The epic human story of 2012. Bitcoin isn't just a simplistic narrative about numerical financial figures or dramatic price charts. It is, more importantly, a powerful, multi-layered testament to the triumphs and failures of fundamental human psychology, the grinding, relentless, transformative passage of time, and the perennially elusive, profoundly complex, often paradoxical nature of what being truly rich ultimately and meaningfully means in the chaotic, unforgiving crucible of the real world.